Hello and welcome to Skills to Pay the Bills. I'm your host, Tia Young, and we have a great show for you today. Did you know that your home's best friend is your plumber? Our special guest grew up in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area and currently resides in Northern Virginia. He is a small business entrepreneur and has been in the plumbing business about 22 years. Please meet Master Plumber, Mr. Jeremy Langenfield of Jeremy's Plumbing Service LLC. Jeremy, welcome to
Hey,
Skills to Pay the Bills.
yes,
It's
thank
so
you.
good to have you here.
Oh, thank you.
All right, well, let's get started.
All right.
Tell us a little bit about your business and how you got started.
Oh, okay. Well, I just spent a little while outside of high school, and I'd pursued many different tasks and trades, just sort of as jobs, just to kind of fill in and have a little extra money. I wasn't quite sure what career path I wanted to go down, but I've done a little carpet laying, a little light carpentry, a little landscaping. I took a few college courses, but I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do, but I enjoy working with my hands. I find it kind of a creative process, creative experience. And I'm sort of an artist at heart too. I've always liked to do things working with my hands, like woodworking and doing paintings and drawings and stuff. I had some friends that enjoyed their jobs as plumbers, and I became acquainted with some of the work they do. And I started out many years ago training with a plumber, and I just went from there. And it turned out to be a fairly interesting and rewarding trade.
Right. Well, Jeremy, I see a lot of young people back in my day that we had classes where people could come in and learn how to do plumbing. They could learn how to do various skills, but I don't see that in the school system anymore. What do you think? Do you think that this is it a dying field, or do you see many young people going into the plumbing business?
Um, I don't think it's decreased a whole lot. I think as time goes on, it seems there's going to be more tech jobs.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of great incentives to going to school. There's a lot of interesting things that people can do through a college career. But there are a fair amount of people who just, like myself, who enjoy working with their hands and doing a trade that is fairly important.
Right.
Plumbing is important to maintain sanitary conditions, and basically it's necessary health-wise.
Right. That's true.
I don't think there's a great decrease, although there's more fields opening up all the time in the areas of new technology. So I think over time there may be some decrease. I think it kind of equals out, though. While there is maybe a little bit of decrease due to more technically skilled training that one would learn in college, there's more and more people getting online and learning how to do little repairs here and there as well. So it sort of maintains a balance.
Okay. All right.
But when it comes down to a situation where it really counts, it is important to have a professional,
That's true.
somebody that knows what they're doing when the situation is called for.
Right. I agree with that 100%. Well, what does it take to become a master plumber? I'm thinking that there are different levels in that field, and I'm thinking also that the master plumber would be the highest level. Is that correct?
That is correct. A lot of plumbers who are master plumbers have attained the highest level in terms of recognition and getting that license. That allows you to do bigger contract jobs. Especially if you're starting your own business, you have to have that master plumber's license.
Right.
And that's important if you're going to do steady contracting work. As far as the level of attainment in professionalism, now there's a lot of plumbers who don't necessarily have their master's license. They'll have their journeyman's license or other types of business license that allows them to do a certain amount of work under a certain cost. I believe it's important to go through the training because there is a lot of detail that you pick up on by studying and learning the plumbing code, which is largely what having your master's license entails. But as far as being a good plumber, it's not so much the license, it's just your dedication to doing quality work, being conscientious about how you do your work, and also time. The longer you do it, the more familiar with different products there are, knowing how to track down the right part for whichever kind of faucet that needs to be repaired.
Right.
It's knowing those details that maybe 1 out of 50 times, you know, Joe Schmo handyman might not always see.
Right.
And then it's important.
Yeah, that's
Because you don't want to cause a leak or a flood.
Right.
But yeah, I'd say it's mostly dedication and time.
And time.
And time
Now,
that you
when you speak of time, so how much time would it take, or does it take, to become a master plumber? Is it like a few months or a few years?
Oh, the typical course that many people take is that they're in the field for a certain amount of time. They'll usually get on a truck with an experienced plumber and be a helper for several years. And after doing that, they'll typically, if they want to pursue the license, go to school. I took the Fairfax County Adult Education and Licensing, and it's a 4-year program, night courses, and that's probably the most extensive training as far as schooling goes, because you learn greatly from other people's experience in the classroom.
Right.
Everybody shares their common plumbing experiences. An apprentice or a helper will typically do that after deciding to go into the trade. And then after that, you just need to spend a year in the field, and then you're eligible to take the master's test.
Right, I bet that's a humdinger.
Yeah.
Master's test.
It can be. It's not too bad.
Yeah.
You know, it's mostly just knowing the code book.
Right.
You know,
That's a lot.
And you can even have the book with you when you take the test, but it's just knowing how to look stuff up. It's just a lot of details they get you on that might not be under the main heading. So it's how well you know that book.
Yeah.
You know, being able to look stuff up.
That's good.
But they also want to make sure you have a certain amount of time in the field.
Right. Well, what about the unions? I remember back in the day, and we won't tell my age, but back in the day.
Back in the day, how long ago?
Many years ago. There were several different plumbing unions around, and they did a lot to bring people on board and help them to get trained and help to keep the wages fair. So what would you say about that? Are the unions still around, or are they pretty much gone?
They are still around. The unions, and I almost went through the union program. They have a great program. The local union in this area has a very good program. And they're fairly extensive as well. A student will work on the construction site while going to school, and they have their own school, of course. My expertise is in home service. I repair stuff mostly, repair and do some remodeling. I'm pretty in depth about doing certain repairs, about knowing the different products and the different ways of doing things around the house. The union is largely new construction, bigger buildings, and that is also good work. It's admirable work. You know, it's a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of getting up on lifts 50 feet above the concrete slab and hanging piping. And yeah, it's the union is, I think they do have some service companies, but they're largely new construction.
Right. Well, my other question, and this is kind of a personal thing here, is that, Jeremy, I don't know any women plumbers. Do women go into this field, or what's the deal with that?
I would like to see more women plumbers. I would. With what I was just talking about, construction plumbing, I've known there to be a few. Of course, the percentages is probably less than 10% women. I think women could do an excellent job doing plumbing work. There might be certain tasks that maybe the physical strength of a man would make it a little bit easier. You know, if you're hauling 10, 20-foot lengths of iron piping or ductile iron. Of course, being a service plumber, I don't get into that so much, but I've known there to be a few very good female plumbers.
Okay.
And
well, my hope is restored.
I think you know, I have a certain sensitivity that goes into my work where I not only want to do the job right, I want to make it look nice.
Right.
And you know, I just take pride in how I do it and whether something I do feels right or not. And I think women can have that same kind of I wouldn't say intuition, but sensibility, sensibility,
Right.
and in doing plumbing work. I think it's just a trade that a lot of women don't want to do. A lot of people don't want to do it,
Right.
especially when you're in a basement full of water and sewage. You know, most people don't really want to
It could get messy.
tread around that stuff.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. That's
yeah.
true. That is true. Well, my next question has to do with, you know, when you go into hotels and you go into restaurants, the technology in the bathrooms is so different now. I mean, you don't pull a towel out anymore. You put your hand
Oh,
under,
okay, yes.
you know, and
I
you
like
don't
that.
you don't
I
turn
like
on the
that.
faucet. You know, I guess is it infrared? Is that what it's called?
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
It, so
Be a little
is-
annoying sometimes. You keep passing your hand
Right.
back and forth, and it plays games with you.
That's true.
And
Well,
as soon as you walk away, it turns on.
in new homes and townhomes and single family homes, is that technology happening there, or is it still the same old fashioned, you know, turn on the spigot?
To some extent, to some extent. The infrared sensors, you don't have to be an expert electrician or electrical technician to know how they work. It's just a simple matter of putting a battery in the faucet. If it stops working, the circuit board's fried, then you can pretty much order a new one,
Right.
put that in, or
Right.
oftentimes it's just it's cheaper to replace the faucet. But in new houses, I've come across maybe several different brands of faucet that does have the infrared sensors on it. They're not real common. I installed one for a friend actually a couple years ago, and she likes it okay. She found that a lot of the time, when she wasn't intending to use the faucet, but would just walk past it or just kind of, it has a long gooseneck spout. She just kind of brush against it, walking past it or something, would come on by
It'll come
itself.
by itself.
But,
So what we're
there's
going
a
to do?
couple good ones on the market. They're not, I don't think they've taken off to a large extent
Right.
yet.
Well, we're going to take a short station break. We'll be right back.
When I look in the mirror,
Do I like what I see?
yes. I like my teeth and I like my tongue. I like my nose. I like my ears.
And my eyes?
And I like my face. Me gusta todo.
I see a perfect reflection of me.
And I wouldn't change a single thing.
Because I am enough.
Thank you for joining us on Skills to Pay the Bills. Our special guest today is Master Plumber, Jeremy Langenfield. So, Jeremy,
Yes.
my next question has to do with maybe something a little bit outside of plumbing, and that is wiring and electricity. Do you have to have some training in that, or do you just call in, you know, an electrician?
It's not generally required to know a whole lot about electricity, but you should at least know the basics. As with any trade, I think it is important to know general handyman type common sense. And you get that just through simply knowing your trade, but trades that you aren't versed in or educated in. You just have to be willing to find the answers. You have to be willing to get online, look stuff up, read up on it. As far as electricity and plumbing is concerned, it's required that you do know a little bit. Electric water heaters, of course, are electrically wired, so you should have some knowledge about basic wiring, as well as dishwashers and garbage disposals.
Right.
You should have some sense of basic wiring. I myself have some fairly good general handyman skills, and I can do some light carpentry work and replace switches and outlets, and
Okay, that's good.
I can do some basic electrical troubleshooting.
Right, right.
Don't
Sounds
like to
good.
go too far into it, but I do know the basics.
And you mentioned something earlier that I want to tap in on, and that's safety. You talked about safety.
Yes.
And somehow you don't really, at least I never have thought about safety when working with plumbers. But, you know, talk to us a little bit about that.
Okay. Safety is important. I always try to be conscientious about everything I do. It's important to follow the general safety rules according to the code book. You know, make sure you don't have any leaks. You know, double check all your gas connections very carefully. Make sure the piping's well supported. Make sure you use things like nail plates so the piping is safe and protected from mechanical damage. When I do an installation, I always try to install it in the safest way possible. I do tend to be a little, maybe a little pickier about that than most. For example, when I'm putting in a faucet, I try to arrange the supply tube so that if somebody's shoving something underneath the cabinet, there's no chance of anything sharp hitting the supply tube so that they get ruptured.
Right.
So a lot of that is thinking ahead to possible hazards that could occur.
What about safety for you, for yourself?
Oh, for myself as well, and a lot of that comes by following the code. It's a good idea to bring a fire extinguisher on the job when you're soldering water piping or doing any kind of welding. To have masks when you're going in a dusty crawl space, to wear a mask and a suit that's somewhat repels asbestos. You know, you don't want to expose yourself to that. So there's various situations. It's a good idea to have bug spray. Quite often there'll be a wasp's nest out near a crawl space where a plumber has to go in. Yeah, there's the general common sense things and things that are required according to the code to be safe. A wise plumber once told me, a wise old plumber, that in order to be truly safety-minded, it's important not only to follow the safety rules, but to be able to foresee certain problems before they happen.
That's pretty wise.
Like if you have marbles on the top of loose marble sitting on the top of the stairs, you know, that's an obvious hazard. You might want to pick them up. I always try to identify possible problems. If I'm fixing some rusted out old galvanized water pipe and I see there's stalactites growing on the joints next to me, I make it a point to inform the customers there's a good chance that there's going to be a leak. If I see an open electrical outlet box below some water piping where there's a lot of condensation, you know, I make it a point to, I'll either do a little bit extra to make sure it's safe. I'll put a cover on that box, or at least inform the customer so they know that that has to be moved over for safety. So yeah, I always try my best to be fairly conscientious about safety and possible hazards.
You mentioned, when you mentioned, you know, sharing information with the customers. Do you ever get customers, and mostly men, who consider themselves to know a lot about plumbing, and then you can hardly get your job done because they're standing right? How do you handle that?
Well, I'll tell you, one reason I went into service plumbing is because I do enjoy meeting different people, as opposed to being the construction site guy. Although both aspects of the trade do have their own interesting things about it. I mean, it's really neat to see how a new building goes up.
Right.
You know, and if you like being out in the elements, that's great. I prefer to most of the time work inside in the air conditioning. But yes, along with that, there are a lot of different people that you meet, and some of them are a little bit demanding, and will stand over your shoulder and look at you through a magnifying glass. You just got to smile and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. And I don't have a problem with that. If you're paying good money, yeah, you have every right to watch. And I do find that a little flattering, you know, and I'll try to educate the customer a little
Right.
bit. There are some guys that think things ought to be done just an exact certain way, and I will appease them maybe to a certain extent if it's something that's going to work.
It doesn't go against the code.
It doesn't go against the code.
code.
Engineers are the worst where that's concerned.
Yeah, I bet they are.
Engineers know everything.
So does it mean that sometimes you have to go through concrete, or is that, because I saw someone once that I thought was a plumber, and it looks like he was breaking through concrete, and I'm thinking, well, he shouldn't be doing that, but then I don't know.
It depends on what it is. Again, you know, you have a certain code. There's certain places you don't want to break through concrete. But often, yeah, sometimes you have no choice. If you've got some broken drain pipe under the slab and you're getting a clog once a week or more often than that, you know, you just don't really have a choice but to have to break up the concrete.
On that
And
end.
yep. And I repaired a broken sewer main not too long ago, and we ended up putting in a new bathroom, a toilet and a sink, and laying out the piping for that. So, yeah, concrete's part of it.
It's a part of it.
Yeah.
Well, now this next question is definitely something me is, do you ever run into rats and snakes? That may be why women might not want to
Oh,
do
okay.
this job. Does that, you know, because you have to go out in the yards and sometimes you have to dig holes, right? And you go in walls and have you
Yes.
ever had that
Yes.
happen?
Every now and then you'll come across rodents. It's not so bad working outside. The plumber will, the service guy who does installation of new water piping, water mains, and sewer mains will have to dig that ditch. And snakes and stuff like that aren't really a problem.
They're not? Oh,
No, not
okay.
doing that. The main problem is wiring and utilities that are already in the ground. Got to call Miss Utility, have it
Isn't that-
marked.
have it marked.
That'll get you 10 times worse than a rodent. But yes, I have been around dead rats and have,
Oh, dead if they're dead. That's okay.
I do come across rodents from time to time. They seem to like to chew on dishwasher drain hoses.
Really?
And
I
I've
didn't know
found
that.
a few leaks in those from rats chewing on them. I try to clean up the area for my customers, so it's not uncommon for me to bag a rat from time to time or sweep up some turds from time to time.
Well, we know that you are a master plumber, but what are the jobs, and you can do any, you know, you can do all of it, but what are the jobs that you most like?
Oh, me? I would just say, I don't mind drain cleaning. It's fairly straightforward. Well, not always. I mean, if there's a problem with the drain line, sometimes you can only go so far with the cable, lest the cable gets stuck in the drain line if there's a really bad break in the drain piping. I don't mind doing sewer mains as long as it's not completely backed up with sewage. My favorite types of jobs, well, I'm primarily a service plumber. I do tackle some bigger jobs. I do like a good remodel rough-in when everything goes smoothly according to plan. I enjoy repairing faucets. I like taking a faucet apart, and there's so many different kinds of faucets. I'm still running into faucets that work a little differently than the ones I've seen. So I like seeing how things are built. You know, I like taking things apart.
Right.
So I enjoy faucets. I enjoy installing new faucets. Toilet repairs, the easy stuff, of course, is always enjoyable.
That's good.
Yep.
And we have a couple of minutes left, and I'm going to try to see if I can get two more questions in here. But the one I really want to ask you is, what would you tell a young man or woman who is interested in becoming a master plumber?
I would say it's a good trade, but there's a few things you should do. You should, I very much recommend doing the schooling. There is a lot of plumbers who don't have their license. And you can learn enough to do the job well, just having that experience, years of experience working with somebody. But I do recommend at least going to school for your journeyman's, working with somebody. You should have at least a couple years experience working with somebody. A good plumber who is able to cover the bases safely and efficiently in all situations has at least a couple years on the road with someone else who's experienced. And then I would say you should just not mind getting your hands dirty and coming home a little late from time to time.
Right, right.
You know,
Well, I think that's good advice.
And plumbing has more parts than any other trade, so
Right.
you got to work on your organizational skills.
Okay, all right, I
Keep
can
those
understand
tools
that.
and parts
Yeah.
organized, you'll get the job done twice as fast.
Right, right. Well, Jeremy, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much
Hey.
for taking the time away from your busy job
I really
to come
appreciate
here
it.
and share with us. I really appreciate it, and you're welcome back at any time.
You're quite welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome. If you have any questions about today's show on plumbing, please give Jeremy Langenfield a call. His information is scrolling on your television screen right now. Your home's best friend is a qualified plumber. To be without a working toilet, a defective sump pump in your basement, or a non-working disposal unit in the kitchen can cause some unhappy moments in your home. Make sure you have a good plumber nearby who is willing to get the job done and done well, no matter how long it takes. Thank you for watching Skills to Pay the Bills, and we will see you next week with another great show. I'm Tia Young, wishing you a fantastic week. Bye-bye.